It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker for this evening, Rabia Siddique. Now, Rabia is an Australian criminal and human rights lawyer, a retired British Army officer, a former terrorism and war crimes prosecutor, international humanitarian, a hostage survivor, a professional speaker, a facilitator, a coach, and a published author. I'm not sure what other titles we can offer at the moment, but that's probably quite a lot to be going on with. Now, she's received various forms of recognition for her work. She's known internationally as a powerful and transformative and inspirational speaker. She's a committed and passionate human rights advocate, and she's also the mother to 3 young triplet boys, which she's described as her biggest and most rewarding challenge yet. Before we actually welcome Rabia, I believe there's a short video we're going to watch, sort of also as part way of introduction, so just bear with us and we'll roll the video.
2005 in the terrorist hotspot of Basra, Iraq, where Rabia, an Australian lawyer with Muslim heritage, was based in the British Army. When 2 British soldiers are taken hostage at a notorious police compound, terrorists refused to negotiate with anyone other than Major Rabia.
The soldiers were being held that the violence started.
She's choppered into the middle of an angry mob, where Rabia gets an agreement to set the soldiers free. Then, outside, all hell breaks loose. What she could see was British soldiers engulfed in flames. Inside the compound, Rabia is now also taken hostage. Then, in a smash-and-grab rescue mission, British forces regain control.
Some reports say British forces used tanks to break down the walls of the central jail.
But for Rabia, the triumph is short-lived. While her colleague is awarded the highest military honour, Rabia's role in the incident is erased from the records. In a David and Goliath legal battle, Rabia takes on the powerful UK Ministry of Defence for discrimination and wins. Her fight for equal justice grabbing headlines around the world.
Distinguished guests, scholars, researchers, practitioners from around the world, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Perth. First of all, thank you to Adam for that very kind and somewhat exhausting introduction. It was an honour to be invited to present the opening address at this extremely important, esteemed, and I would say timely symposium. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Noongar people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd like to also take the opportunity to thank the sponsors of this important symposium and all supporters, and acknowledge the symposium partners, in particular Angel Hands, whom I have a very close and personal connection. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Human progress is neither automatic or inevitable. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, as well as the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals." This symposium is the bringing together of you, the dedicated, passionate, concerned individuals who exert yourselves tirelessly in the pursuit of a truer, more equal, and sustainable justice. It is to all of you that I address my words this evening. As you will have seen from the brief introductory video, I am a very ordinary person who has been exposed to some extraordinary circumstances in my life. I have seen, played a part, and been intrinsically involved in the criminal justice systems in many countries in a number of different capacities. As a defence lawyer, representing those charged with criminal offences that in many ways were victims of their own circumstances and poor choices, but also often those that were marginalised and disenfranchised by society. As a prosecutor, attempting to bring justice to those often further up the food chain, those responsible for preying upon the vulnerable and disenfranchised, gang leaders, drug runners and importers, violent extremists and radicalisers. As an advocate, in particular for prisoners on death row, sentenced to cruel and unusual punishment where the only end to their state-sanctioned sentence is the ultimate end to life itself. As a victim, as a child victim of domestic violence, of child sexual abuse, and later on in life, of institutional discrimination. And as a soldier, being responsible in theatres of war for ensuring military's adherence to international laws of armed conflict, and later falling victim myself to the traumas of war as a hostage survivor. I feel my experiences and the decision I made early on in life to dedicate my career to helping others find a voice and helping others access justice, perhaps in a way that I hadn't as a child, qualifies me to share some of my learnings and my truths with you today. If we are to achieve equal, sustainable and effective justice in our world, where all parties are given a voice and everyone's needs are taken into consideration, we need, I believe, a profound paradigm shift in the way we perceive and structure our criminal justice system. In my opinion, we need to fundamentally change the narrative on justice and on how we measure and define justice, as the current traditional approaches and policies are, I believe, falling short of the mark. They are not effectively reducing crime rates. They're not effectively focusing on rehabilitation over punishment. And they are not giving the appropriate support and voice to victims of crime. This symposium can be the first step towards that paradigm shift. Education and awareness is the key. And that is, I believe, the most important purpose of this event. If you are not convinced of this, let me highlight a few realities to illustrate my point. According to the United Nations, and reiterated by Brian Stevenson, the Black American human rights lawyer who was the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, incarceration rates around the world are at their all-time highest, with the United States of America still occupying the position of world's leading jailer, with 2.3 million people in prison, and with a disproportionately high proportion of these prisoners, Black Americans, where the USA currently imprisons a greater percentage of the Black population than were incarcerated in South Africa at the height of apartheid. Australia, my country, is replicating this trend as the 6th highest jailer in the world, with a disproportionate high amount of our Indigenous community serving custodial sentences. The economic cost to nations that prioritise punishment over rehabilitation and restorative justice is in the billions, and the social cost is immeasurable. And for what? When there exists no definitive evidence that high incarceration rates result in the reduction of crime, the deterrent effect of imprisonment, it appears, is a myth. Violence and attacks on human rights around the world is on the rise and is one of the biggest epidemics our communities are facing. With respect to violence against women, domestically in this country, almost 1 in 2 women in Australia have or will be the victims of some form of physical violence, with almost 1 in 3 falling victim to domestic violence. Internationally, there are over 5,000 reported honour killings of women around the world. Despite being 20 years on from the Beijing Declaration, this year's UN Commission on the Status of Women reported that nowhere in the world has achieved gender equality. And in fact, progress towards gender equity has been slowed, with the rise in fundamentalism resulting in increased attacks against the human rights of women and girls. In relation to institutional abuse, after decades and generations of large-scale cover-up and deliberate conspiracies of secrecy, only now is institutional sexual abuse being exposed in the English-speaking world. It remains to be seen, I would suggest, how justice will be meted out in this area. Despite a number of questionable government policies relating to sentencing, immigration, and counter-terrorism, human trafficking, slavery, drug importation and circulation, cybercrime, and violent extremism remain some of the most serious threats in our communities that our governments have failed to understand or effectively address. Our criminal justice systems are, in my opinion, not fit for purpose. We continue to look at justice through a narrow lens, confining the players within it to a select few. We continue to focus on the reactionary and not the proactive, on punishment and not healing and prevention. And we have not fully committed to understanding the processes that still confound us and render us relatively impotent. The processes of criminalisation, marginalisation, and radicalisation. The processes that, when understood and addressed, unlock the key to the cycle of offending and suffering. We are not adequately involving victims, the reformed and the rehabilitated, in our justice systems, when these are the very people that often hold the power and influence, the ones that can indeed stop the reoffending, play a part in prevention, and participate in the restorative process before involving the already overstretched and under-resourced courts and prisons. And in relation to victims, we are still not properly and meaningfully supporting and caring for victims of trauma and violence. To me, that is no more starkly seen than the message that this country gives to return service personnel, many of whom suffer with the wounds of war for the rest of their lives. Incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder is downplayed, often ignored, and not even recorded or measured in this country. And that is how we repay those in our community that have dedicated their lives to a career of service. Only within the last few years are we speaking openly about domestic violence and institutional abuse. And we are light years away, I would submit, from understanding what it is in the Western society to be taunted, abused, and vilified for one's race, religion, and lifestyle choices. Much of this is symptomatic of the politics of fear, secrecy, and prejudice that currently reigns supreme. And although it is up to our leaders to set the tone, we all must take some responsibility, as in our democratic societies, we are the ones that elect those leaders. And we are the ones that must send a message that this is unacceptable. The first step, I believe, to changing the justice narrative is education. In my view, education is the vaccine against violence, ignorance, and oppression. Through education and awareness, we all have a responsibility and can play our part in giving the voiceless a voice, to allowing all sections of our community equal access to justice, and to start to understand processes that hold the key to the cycles of offending. In the words of the American architect Bucky Fuller, we are called upon to be the architects of the future, not its victims. With that in mind, I wish you all a very thought-provoking, productive, and I hope transformative symposium. And I await with great anticipation to hear how you will all embrace your responsibility to, in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, create the change we all wish to see in this world. Thank you so very much.